is Napoleon III so little known? Fantastic question, because he was once one of the most famous and most powerful men in the world, the first ever directly elected president of France, the last ever reigning sovereign, a man who in the 19th century everyone would have heard of. And today there is an astonishingly large number of people who have no idea there was a third Napoleon. I think part of the reason is the Franco-Prussian War, which is why the regime falls and he ends up in exile in this wonderful house here, which of course not where he would have wanted to have been. He would have wanted to have stayed on the throne. The Franco-Prussian War is an absolute disaster for France, and it's convenient fiction that one man is responsible for the ruin and dismemberment, because France loses territory in Alsace-Lorraine, and the reparations and the occupation by German forces. So this buries his historical reputation in France and beyond, and there's a black legend that builds up around him. I think in Britain, where he was actually much more popular after his fall than he was in France. So he was remembered, but he seemed to slip through the cracks of historical consciousness. And I always think it partially, I think for British people, they can't hold the thought in their head that there was a third Napoleon, that the uncle definitely overshadows the nephew. And I have, to shamelessly promote myself, written a book on Napoleon III, and often people look at me sort of with looks of disbelief and incomprehension. They think I've made some kind of mistake, that there can't be surely a third Napoleon. That there is, of course, and people can learn more about him. But it's those two things really, the black legend that builds up after his fall because of the disastrous Franco-Prussian War, and then the fact that he just becomes almost forgotten in historical memory in this country. What kind of a person was he? He was an extraordinarily contradictory character. Him, in the first and foremost, he's absolutely obsessed with his uncle, and he believes he's a man of providence and it's his destiny to rule France. No one else believes that for quite a long time. It's not until he's 40 that he's elected president of France. And prior to that, he had twice tried to seize power. He'd constantly been plotting, chain-smoking, conspiring in order to fulfill what he sees as his destiny. But everyone else thinks that he is mad. He dropped it into conversation. He's in exile in London a number of times because he's, as I say, he tries to seize power unsuccessfully. He's incredibly charming. He's cosmopolitan. He grew up in exile in Switzerland, but he spent the winters with his family in Italy. As I say, he spent time here in exile. So he speaks French, he speaks English, he speaks Italian, he speaks German. So he's able to converse, with sort of aristocrats who see him as I say, incredibly sort of charming and polite, well-mannered. But because he had this slightly odd upbringing in exile, and he also kind of grew up in revolutionary meetings in taverns and chain smoking, which for an aristocratic mid-19th century gentleman was unheard of. He's very comfortable talking to what we would say ordinary people, and that's going to stand him in good stead for when he finally succeeds in politics, as I say, age 40, and he becomes president of France. So you have, on the one hand, this sort of conspirator convinced that he's destined to rule France. On the other, a very charming, great, kind of conversationalist, and also somebody who's got, a slight edge to him because he has had an experience that most aristocratic people of the 19th century haven't had, which is, hanging out in revolutionary conspiracies. One of the problems that he has is he doesn't look anything like his uncle. So he's this sort of bizarre figure trying to restore his uncle's empire, the First Empire, which of course, ends in 1814, brief, comeback tour, ended by the Battle of Waterloo. And so when he's doing his conspiring, everyone's sort of very disappointed because he's got this kind of long, bushy moustache and goatee beard. But what he does share with his uncle, he's an excellent storyteller, often quite, shall we say, loose relationship with the truth. So he's very conscious of his public image, and he's what today we would call a man of the people, possibly even a populist. He's got that touch. He can appeal to what he would call the masses and win them over. When he becomes emperor, this is absolutely central to how he rules. And Eugénie, who becomes empress in 1853 after their marriage, is central to that too. She is at a wonderful kind of front of house for the empire. There's an impossible glamour. She's considered to be one of the most beautiful women of her age. These magnificent dresses. She's a fashion icon. Women want to dress like her. They can't actually dress like her because it would cost them a huge amount of money, but they cut out, the fashions, and fashion magazines feature and profile her. So she's a kind of wonderful, and especially when the Imperial kind of, the Fête Impériale it's called, which is sort of series of balls and parties, particularly when they go on tours to the provinces, and when she kind of sweeps into the ballroom in her dress. People cry with emotion so that they can finally see her. So she is, a huge asset in terms of style. And in presenting the empire as this kind of wonderful kind of fairy tale that everyone can aspire to, because there's this idea of sort of democracy at heart of the empire as well. And so she's a huge asset and a huge part of the Second Empire, central to its success for so many years. Paris became this enormous building site in the 19th century of perpetual noise and commotion and energy and creativity. Also a lot of destruction, of course, because they had to demolish much of medieval Paris to make way for the new. Wide boulevards beloved of tourists and glossy TV shows like Emily in Paris. And it didn't really fit with the narrative that we were talking about earlier, that, of course, Napoleon III becomes the most hated man in France. So he tried to sideline him. I think today there's a recognition that that would not have happened without him. There's a lot of radical and innovative kind of economics and politics to it as well, because it's very much his personal vision. And he literally has to bulldoze through a lot of red tape that has stopped anyone doing any work in Paris. You might say, plus ça change, I suppose. It's a singular vision that he has to create this wonderful capital of modernity that promotes France and French culture and architecture and power. And it simply wouldn't have happened without him. One of his great insights is that his politics, which is a strange mix of the radical and the conservative, but that can be popular and it is democratic. There are elections, and by 1870 he's reformed the empire to what historians call the liberal empire. And this is a system of government that no other authority than the British ambassador says is more democratic than Britain. He stayed in power for over 20 years in France, notoriously hard to govern, and the only person who's reigned longer is Louis XV. The last person who's reigned longer is Louis XV, way back in the 18th century. So he's been in power longer than his uncle, longer than the kings, longer than the republics. He's done brilliantly well. But he's undone by foreign policies. Foreign policy in general is a mixed bag. He thinks he's very good at it. I think most historians would say he's not. But it's the Franco-Prussian War that is absolutely disastrous. He kind of walks into this war, sleepwalks into it. Bismarck, who's head of the, leading Prussia, very much wants France to declare war because he knows that he can defeat the French army and then unite Germany. Napoleon III walks into that trap. The French army is ill-prepared. There's no plan. Napoleon III takes personal command militarily because he has to emulate his uncle's great feats. And this is disaster. He loses one battle after another, and eventually he is surrounded, outnumbered, and surrenders. And that when that news reaches Paris, the empire collapses. So I think you have to acknowledge the foreign policy mistakes, if that's not too kind a word for the Franco-Prussian War, but at the same time pointing towards all of the incredibly innovative and radical things that he does on the domestic front. That means he's able to govern France for over 20 years. Yes, so new book coming out 2nd of July 2026. It did take me a long time to write. It turns out that once you become emperor, your universe expands. And of course, he had a good 40 years before he came there. So as a biography, the kind of voluminous research kind of ballooned. But now, yes, it is coming available, and everyone must buy it and read it. I think the most surprising element is looking at his early life. And where he spent a lot of time, as I say, conspiring and quite revolutionary and radical politics, and how much of that radicalism and utopian vision comes into his rule as emperor, where he's normally caricatured as someone who's very reactionary, someone who's very authoritarian, for reasons that are quite clear when he comes to power in 1851 and he launches a coup d'etat. But actually, he never lost that sort of generosity and that belief that he was helping people and that the government was designed to benefit the people of France, which it very much did do until the Franco-Prussian War, I think you could argue. I think you can definitely make comparisons to populism, but he was a populist with a heart. He was concerned about the people that he governed and tried to govern in their interests as he saw them. And he's someone who I think has got a lot of resonance for politics today.